I actually voted to leave the European Union. I think it's an undemocratic and unreformable institution. And I actually agree with Jeremy's position that he should stay neutral, because I do think that if we have a referendum and let's say Leave wins again, Jeremy has to deliver that result in a meaningful and credible way. If Remain wins again, then he has to deliver that result in a meaningful and credible way. So, in some ways we're not, and the other thing is we want to deliver more than just Brexit. We're going to deal with Brexit in the first 6 months, but Jeremy's candidacy is about much more than that. And if he falls down on either side, then how can we kind of credibly say, well, we're going to deliver all the other things that we think are really important as well?
Henry, Jeremy Corbyn was asked, I think, 9 times by the Prime Minister on Tuesday.
Yeah.
He didn't have an answer on Tuesday. He has magically come up with an answer on Friday at the BBC leaders' debate.
Yeah.
Is it a satisfactory answer, do you think, for the electorate? Can you go to the people and say, give me your vote, but on the biggest issue of this country, I will remain neutral? Or do you think perhaps it is a wise move in the sense that what we've seen so far, let's say take David Cameron, he put his weight behind the Remain campaign lost, he had to go. And this way, Jeremy Corbyn kind of guarantees that whichever way this referendum goes, because he stayed neutral, he can carry out the so-called, and I hate using the phrase, will of the people. He has the credentials to carry out leaving the EU, and he also has the credentials to keep the nation within the EU if he doesn't pick a side. Does it make sense?
I understand the logic of it.
Certainly, there is a case to be made that if you bet the house on an outcome, then
if you bet on red or black, then you're going to lose somehow.
You have to, and there was an argument during the 2016 referendum campaign that David Cameron should have tried to stay aloof, and that maybe he could have then carried on. But I think that what David Cameron recognised during that campaign is that this is an existential question. Our relationship with the European Union is not just a question for the next 5 years. It's a question that will shape British foreign policy and our place in the world for the next 50 years. And it is the preeminent issue. Our entire politics might be realigning on the question of Leave Remain. We're seeing some of these constituency polls showing the Tories are maybe about to lose seats that they've held for 100 years.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, so the point is that, given that, I think that it is very difficult to try and lead the country and fight an election campaign without having a view on that central question. And I do understand the tactical positioning, but I do think that if you're a Leave voter and a Labour government gets re-elected and then negotiates a deal, and then the vast majority of Labour MPs then campaign to Remain, are you really going to think that that deal was negotiated in good faith as a Leave voter? I don't think you are. And I think that Labour, for the past few years, Labour have done a very good job of keeping their Brexit position vague and trying to hold voters on both sides. And I think that strategy is now running out of road.
The lady on Talk Radio saying Corbyn should stay neutral to show neutrality to the EU. No. His job as Prime Minister is to act in the best interests of the country, the UK, something he has never done in his entire political career. How can a neutral negotiate? You couldn't make this up.
Yeah, well, I would actually say that Corbyn is an incredibly principled person. He has held, the same principled views for all the time he's been in government. Like, he's consistently voted against austerity. He's consistently voted against war. He was part of the movement against apartheid. So I think the idea that you can't trust Jeremy Corbyn is just a bit of a nonsense that's created by the media, because he has kind of always stood up for what he believes in.
You, as the Conservative Party, the Conservative Party is going out to the nation to ask for the backing of the people, the vote of the people. It's not just Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson, let's not forget, has been in government. He was the Foreign Secretary not too long ago. So he has been part of the government machine for quite some time. How do you explain things like, I was talking to the Trussell Trust a couple of weeks ago, 820,000 food parcels, 3-day emergency food parcels. In this period of last year, we've seen a 25% rise in people going to food banks. How can you possibly stand on the doorstep and say, give us your vote again? How do you excuse people living in in-work poverty because of terrible contracts? 3 million children being in working families, being in poverty. We saw the A&E waiting times exceed all records since records began. How do you stand on the doorstep and say, yeah, let us have another crack at it?
Well, the fact is, of course, you're painting one side of the picture there, Alexis. As you remember in 2010...
I'm painting the picture that's currently what's going on in the country.
Well, there are two sides to that picture, and the other side is when the Conservatives inherited the keys to number 10 in 2010. Liam Byrne left us a note.
Yes, he left a note. But Nigel, come on, you and I know each other very well. This is 9 years ago. I mean, are you going to be saying that in the next general election?
No, of course not, because you saw under Theresa May that the reins being relaxed as the economy was growing. Unemployment has gone down dramatically. We've got the highest levels of employment that the country's ever seen. You talk about the zero contracts. Well, there's nothing worse than a zero job. And we've got more people in employment now. Of course. Than ever been the case before. And so there are lots of bright pictures on the scene, particularly compared to the growth that we've seen since 2010, hitting 19%. And that is predicted to grow even further. And so it's from that viewpoint, Alexis, but also, of course, if you ask me what I hear on the doorstep, the number one thing I hear on the doorstep...
I didn't ask you that, actually, Nigel. I didn't ask you that, and I've got questions that I do want to ask you.
Go on then, Alex. Go on.
So one of the pledges that is coming out, again, we haven't seen the manifesto officially, but one of the guarantees is this Secretary of the Treasury, Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, confirmed this today on Sophie Ridge, a triple tax lock. So no increase in income tax, VAT, and national insurance for 5 years. But you're also telling me that you want to pour more money into the NHS. You've promised to bring back the 20,000 police staff that you've taken away. Basically, you want to take us out of austerity, but you're not going to raise taxes. Where is the money going to come from?
Well, this is something that is going to have to be fully costed. You're absolutely right.
It has not been already?
No. Well, of course it has been. Okay. But the launch of the manifesto, just like the launch of the Labour Party manifesto last week, when they had their so-called grey book, and the Institute of Fiscal Studies went through it with a fine-tooth comb. So let's wait until the launch later today, and I'm absolutely certain there will be a number of bodies that will go through everything there. But the triple tax lock, I'm really pleased we've done that. Because there is a lot of fear with all the spending pledges that somehow or other, either income tax, national insurance or VAT is going to increase. And I just love the Labour Party's position that all their promises can be met with just a small increase. Small, they always say small or little, increase on just 5% of the country. Well, of course, 5% of the top earners are paying 50% of the taxation already, and they can move their assets, and they will. So I'm absolutely certain, Alexis, that all the spending pledges that will be announced today will be fully costed. It'll have to be proven that we'll be able to meet those over a 5-year term of a parliament.
Okay, a question from Holly.
So as well as being a Labour activist, I'm also an English teacher. I trained to teach 7 years ago, so I've only ever taught in schools under a Conservative government, and have just seen the funding to my schools like absolutely decimated. So, got bigger class sizes where I teach. We've got less teaching assistants, and my children come to school hungry. They come to school without a winter coat. Boris Johnson voted for this austerity over and over again, and teachers like me were told there's never been more funding in schools. Suddenly Boris Johnson gets into the Tory leadership and suddenly there's loads of money. My question is, why have we been lied to as teachers for the last 9 years under a Conservative government? And how can we possibly trust you that things are going to change now if you don't know even how you're going to cost the funding you say you're going to put into schools?
You're a Labour activist, and I'm sure you've had every opportunity to apologise to all the listeners of Talk Radio for the reason that we were put into austerity in 2010 when Liam Byrne actually...
Sorry, that wasn't my question. My question was to you. Why is the Conservative government...
It's just that, Holly, no politician can resist a little dig before answering
Yeah. Even if it's to an English teacher.
And I know Nigel well enough that I know he will answer your question. Nigel, over to you.
No, and absolutely right. And now we're coming out of austerity. We have an opportunity, and there will be an announcement on schools, as you know, that there's £14 billion being invested over a 3-year period to ensure that the level amounts of money being spent on primary and secondary pupils throughout the country, which is something that's of great importance to me in the northwest of England, because it seems to me that we are the forgotten people. And as has been said earlier in your programme about Labour heartlands in the past who religiously gone out voting Labour, they'll be looking very carefully at the promises that we're making on schools. And Alexis, you mentioned fact-checking. This is going to be fact-checked, I'm absolutely certain, right, left and centre.
Okay.
But the important thing is, as we come out of austerity, we are able to reward far better the people who, quite frankly, were the ones that had to keep their belts in for a fair period of time.
OK, let's have a quick question from Henry Hill from Conservative Home.
So, like every Conservative activist, I still have nightmares about the Conservative campaign in 2017 and the way that the manifesto staked our coalition through the heart. But whatever you think of the execution, the reason that Theresa May put together that manifesto was because she was trying to address things like social care, some really sort of deep-seated challenges that don't have easy answers. Now, if Boris Johnson's manifesto is going to completely avoid doing what Theresa May's manifesto did, the inference, I think, is that it will therefore maybe duck those questions. Are you concerned that some of those issues like social care that do not have particularly easy answers are not going to be addressed in this manifesto and therefore potentially in the next 5 years of a Conservative government?
Henry, I still wake up at 2 a.m. with beads of perspiration on my brow, remembering the launch of that absolute disaster, Titanic of a manifesto. But you're quite right. Boris Johnson was asked about this, actually, in the first of the head-to-head debates. And he said he would not be ducking the issue of social care, which is one of the huge issues that needs to be addressed by all political parties, quite frankly. But there will be something contained within this manifesto which is going to start to address that. But at the same time, it is not, and he made this clear, going to force people to sell their homes in order to pay for their care as they get older. And that is something that did affect a lot of people. We lost a lot of support because of that stupid policy. And I'm really delighted that Boris is going to both address it, but not address it in a lethal way that is going to cost us dearly at the ballot box.
The Conservatives had claimed Labour tax proposal would slash the inheritance tax threshold from £475,000 to £125,000, meaning families will be hammered for passing their property to their loved ones. That's what the Conservatives claimed Labour were going to do. What are the facts behind that?
So this is complete rubbish, and this is from 5 years ago. This is a crucial thing. This is something the Conservatives... So it's rubbish now. This is something the Conservatives were saying 5 years ago based on rumours about what Labour Party's policies would be. In their manifesto and their document about how they're going to pay for things, they have said that currently... thanks to changes that George Osborne made when he was Chancellor, so previous Conservative government, the inheritance tax threshold for a home is £475,000, i.e. if it's worth that, you pay inheritance tax. Labour want to reverse that change, which would mean that you pay inheritance tax on a home that costs £325,000 or more. So that's what Labour are actually proposing. It's nothing like that rumour.
Rather helpfully, he sent me a screenshot of the date. It's November 20th, 2019. So the Conservative Party have been making that claim. Now, I would suggest to you, Matt, and I think Will may back me up, is that they may be making this claim now, but they're taking it off news that was old news.
You're absolutely right. This is actually a message that the Conservative Party was putting out more recently, but before the Labour manifesto came out. So what they said was based on essentially them making claims about what Labour would do. Those claims weren't true. That's not what Labour wants to do. It's now circulating as a screenshot of what they're saying, and it basically should all be ignored.
So regardless of when it was dated, and thank you, Matt, for being persistent, and we're getting the truth out, it's just not true what the Conservatives are saying, which is that Labour will reduce the inheritance tax threshold from £475,000 to £125,000 is just not in the Labour manifesto.
And it's really important to say, by the way, as I said at the top of this show, one of the tactics we saw from the Conservative Party in this election was this making claims about what Labour would do and putting terrifying price tags on it, and this is one of the examples of that.
Yeah, and of course the Labour manifesto comes out and it doesn't have the same information.
The other thing is, tell us what you're seeing in your local area. We'll need some warning of this, but if you're seeing leaflets that make you wonder, is this really true, and that kind of thing, it's really hard for us to see. We see the national campaigns. We'd love to know what's going on in your constituency, so post in leaflets and things like that. We'd love to take a look.
And always check, remember, you can always check, especially things you agree with. You can go on to fullfact.org. It's a really, really simple website, easy to search. And also, and for those of us, let's admit it, quite a lot of us see a long article and kind of dread to think, but you're very good in putting, this is the claim, this is the reality, right up at the top of the article. So if you want to quickly check something, it's easy to do.
And if you want to check it out, we link to all of our sources so you can make your own minds up.